Hi, this is Peace Matters, a podcast on contemporary geopolitics and international relations. I'm Marila Huszcza, researcher and project manager at the International Institute for Peace. Today we're talking about Armenia, its upcoming parliamentary elections, and the country's recent geopolitical choices. For a long time, Armenia has been a close ally of Russia because of historical ties and strong military and economic cooperation. But recently, things have started to change. Armenia has been diversifying its foreign relations, as well as improving and enhancing ties with the European Union. In this episode, we'll look at how Armenia is trying to balance its relations with these two competing powers, Russia and the European Union, and what this could mean for the country's future. I'm joined by two guests today. Hannes Meissner is a managing partner at LMP Risk and a member of the research group Eastern Europe at the University of Vienna. Christoph Bilban is a researcher at the Institute for Peace Support and Conflict Management at the National Defense Academy in Vienna. Enjoy the discussion. Parliamentary elections are taking place in Armenia on the 7th of June. Armenia is a country in the South Caucasus, and somehow I don't recall any other time before when it was such a big topic in the European Union. The European Political Community Summit happened there a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and everyone is discussing possibilities, the outcomes of the elections. Why do we care so much this time exactly about Armenia? What can you say?
Well, the elections are important. They have implications in three dimensions. It's about the future of Armenia. It has a pro-European government right now. Secondly, it has implications on the region, the ongoing peace negotiations with Azerbaijan. That's a critical point. And the future government will have a decisive impact on the future direction of those negotiations. And thirdly, it has a geopolitical dimension. Russia is trying to take root again or expand its influence again in Armenia. Europe, on the other hand, is trying to get Armenia stronger towards Europe and the South Caucasus in general. It's a region where geopolitical tensions are taking place. Georgia is today much more towards Russia. Azerbaijan is always playing a more independent role in this regard, but Armenia got closer to Europe and to the Western world after the Velvet Revolution in 2018. And now the elections and given the party system of Armenia, the different parties and their vision about the future direction of Armenia, that's a decisive question where the country will develop to.
Yeah, so it sounds to me that it's about geopolitical competition a lot, at least for the powers that are outside of the region. They're trying to, set their foot as much as possible in Armenia, maybe in Georgia or in Azerbaijan. But before we get to that, maybe, Christoph, can you tell us a little bit more about the political system in Armenia? Is it a democracy? What kind of regime is there?
Well, as by the Armenian constitution, of course, it's a parliamentary representative democratic republic. So means that the Prime Minister, also currently Mr. Nikol Pashinyan as the head of government, he is the strong person, not the president. And actually, because also Hannes mentioned Velvet Revolution in 2018, that was the initial spark for the Velvet Revolution, that the former government before 2018, Serge Sargsyan, who was president, then took the decision to transform this semi-presidential system, what was more like it was in Russia before, to a parliamentary republic to stay in power and keep the power himself because he could not be re-elected. That then sparked the protests and brought Nikol Pashinyan to power. Is it a democracy? Well, I think it's also best to look at some of the indices out there on democracy, and let's take Freedom House and its assessment of Armenia from this year. It says Armenia is partly free. Freedom House has two prime dimensions. One hand civil rights, other hand the electoral process, political system. So Armenia is quite close to their threshold to becoming free in certain categories, not in everything. More interesting for me is the VDAM project from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden and their democracy report, because there it's clearly outlined from the researchers that Armenia is since 2020 on a path to re-authoritarianization after this initial democratization developments. And that's something I think we should not forget, talking about the geopolitical implications and the relations to the EU. So it's basically since Pashinyan that there has been a re-authoritarianization. Even one Armenian expert called it last year in a opinion piece in the media that basically Pashinyan's party now has become a Soviet-style party of power again, controlling all the administrative resources, and that's very important also for the elections and how the outcome will be. Besides the candidate list and the spectrum there.
So given that there is this path towards re-autocratization again, what does it mean for the elections? Are they going to be free and fair? Who are the competitors there?
Well, actually, when we look at the post-Soviet space, we've never seen any real free and fair elections. Georgia was very close to Ukraine, actually is very close to, but still we can see Soviet legacy impacting on that, and also the administration. It's always the administration and the political parties behind that try to influence the pre-election process, more or less. Armenia, Georgia, Ukraine, these are countries that are far closer to what we know as free and fair elections. But still, the administration is trying to take influence on that. We know that voters might be bought. So it's always the pre-election process. While on the day itself, we often see, and that's a clear tendency, and that makes elections different and influencing elections different from what we saw in the 2000 years after 2010. It's more the pre-election process that is not free, that is biased, and then the day of the election is always, it looks, most of the cases quite good. But Armenia is definitely a special case, closer towards what we know as free and fair elections, but still not there.
If I may underline that, and Armenia, from the legal requirements, is on a good way that there will be more or less free and fair elections. And 19 parties or party alliances have been registered by the deadline of 23rd of April. So I have not read about any major decisions also by the Central Election Commission to ban parties, which basically is a good sign that they will be free and fair. However, the field is very narrow. So basically, one of the latest polls from EVN of 6th of May shows that 32.5% would vote again for the party civil contract, which is party of ruling Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. So compare this to the 53% they got in the last snap elections in 2021. It's 20% down. And then there's a huge gap to the follow-up parties. And the only main competitor is the Strong Armenia Party, which was only registered in February this year. And their frontman is Samuel Karapetyan. And Karapetyan is an interesting figure. He is Armenian-born Russian oligarch. He made his fortune in Russia under Putin with gas companies and real estate. He's somewhat shown up again in Armenia. He's shown up in the years before also in Nagorno-Karabakh when it still was the de facto government there and the de facto authorities there. That is also why Azerbaijan prosecuted him in 2021 for alleged weapons deliveries to Nagorno-Karabakh. So you see here somewhat ties to Russia, and that's the interesting part with Karapetyan and Strong Armenia. But in the polls, he's only at 10% right now.
So, also in the house arrest, under house arrest?
Yeah, he was arrested in 2025.
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet on if he's still under house arrest. But in any case, if he would get elected and should win the elections, what he must do is to give up his Russian citizenship, his dual citizenship, because by Armenian law, he only could hold Armenian citizenship when having a public office. So let's see. And now the funny thing is, well, you have two major parties. The others in the polls are all below the 5% threshold, which does not mean they would not get in, because Armenian law clearly states that there has to be at least 3 parties in the parliament. So even if there are just 2 get over the threshold of 5% or 7% for electoral alliances, then by the sheer percentage, the third party would also get in. Most likely, for now, maybe it's the Armenia Alliance from former President Robert Kocharyan. But let's see. So a lot of things can change, and this is also clear because about a quarter of the population of the respondents to the polls said, well, I don't know yet who to vote. And now we are about a month, not even a month to the elections, and still a quarter does not know. This means that they actually maybe do not fully believe in Pashinyan's ability to further develop the country and bring Armenia to a better future. On the other hand, also they do not see any other parties. And I think for Karapetyan, these close Russia relations is one of the major obstacles to be an actual real alternative to Pashinyan. And let's see what happens, because of course there are also the allegations that Russia is already meddling with the Armenian elections again, as they tried in Moldova. So, well, we will have to see. At least one thing I'm quite sure now, as when we record this, that there won't be any new parties coming up because this list is closed. And for Russia now, it's more of depriving Pashinyan of legitimacy and really depicting him as not an alternative, and basically also undermining the legitimacy of the elections by keeping people from voting. So if you have a very low turnout, you could always easily question every decision the new government will take, and also this will be very, very much affecting the peace process if there is not a huge part of the population standing behind the prime minister.
So basically, this month before the elections, it's still not clear what the outcome. I mean, this is actually normal in a democratic system, but just to emphasize that we still don't know, and no polling data can tell us what it's going to be.
It's very difficult. Most likely, Pashinyan will win again, but I think it's less about the percentage of votes he gets and more maybe about turnout and legitimacy itself.
Right. Well, from my understanding, the European Union actually made a very strong statement in support of the incumbent government and in support of the Prime Minister. First of all, specifically by making the statement, and secondly, through the 2 events that they held on the 4th of May in Yerevan, and one of them is the European Political Community. So almost 40 European leaders came to Yerevan for this annual conference, or biannual conference, I'm not sure now. And then next day, the European Union Armenia Summit was held for the first time. So this is like huge, political happening for Armenia that never was there before. So what is events a success in the eyes of the Armenian government? What did they serve for? Maybe, Hans, how would you assess that?
Yeah, it's always a good question. A summit, a conference, does it have any impact, or is it successful or not? I think, because in the end, the future of Armenia, the fact whether there will be any peace agreement in the future or not, if it will direct more towards democracy, and if it will be part of the more or less the near abroad, the Russian sphere of influence, or Europe, that's a long-term process. But what this summit and other formats, what they would like to do is to give a clear sign. You know, we support you right now. Armenia belongs to Europe, and we will be ready to get the country closer towards Europe. But on the other hand, it will be a very long process to get Armenia close to Europe and integrate it into EU structures. So it can only be a very first step and a symbolic sign towards closer EU integration. So I would say in that regard, yes, it was a success. If it will be, you know, what the future will bring about, that's still a big question. And that, of course, does not only depend on the elections, but rather on the long-term process.
Well, I definitely agree with Hannes that it was a success insofar that for Yerevan it was a very, very PR effective event. It showed that Armenia is part of Europe. It's also regarding the relationship with EU, the summit was, I would say, a success because there were no statements which block Armenia's intent to becoming a EU member. If you look a little bit into the joint declaration, I have the impression that both parties are very aware that it's not about any official candidate status in the near future, but it's about maxing out what the comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement, which was signed in 2017 and is in effect since 2021, with the European Union offers, and what could be done to help and support Armenia to build the foundations for applying for candidacy and then becoming a EU member in the maybe midterm. I mean, we can talk about details later. With regards to the relationship with Azerbaijan, well, maybe a downside was that President Aliyev did not show up for the EPC summit as he did at other summits. That's maybe not just caused by the location, also caused by the strained relations with European Union. And I think also, if I'm not mistaken, Aliyev also didn't show up at the last EPC summit in Grenada. I think it was 2 years ago. So
here he did show up, but only via video conference.
But here, yeah, and that's I wanted to say here he did show up at least by video, and that's the positive side. So at least he's back in the community. The statement itself, of course, was criticized by some parts. So I did not take a full look at it. On the other hand, other commentators also said that Pashinyan's statements at EPC and also EU-Armenia summit reflect also his intent to abandon the way of this historical Armenian lands narratives, very dominant in the population still. So that's a clear offer also to Baku for signing a peace treaty after the elections. So I think overall, well, yeah, it was a success. Let's see what the follow-up on the declarations will actually be, and also how Russia will behave.
Yeah. I'm wondering about the following, because there is, of course, the reaction from the Russian side to these events was very negative, and one of the most, central reasons for that was Vladimir Zelensky's visit to Yerevan and shaking hands and pictures with Pashinyan and the speech that he gave there, of course. So in principle, Russia has called this whole thing an anti-Russian event, which is, of course, not true and exaggerated. But what is interesting for me is that they also said that it's, the way of the European Union to actually meddle into the internal affairs of Armenia. That's usually the blame that the Europeans give to Russia, that they are doing that. But doesn't Russia have a point in this case? Because I'm thinking it's 1 month before the elections. Imagine if Russia's president went to Yerevan a month before Armenia's elections and supported the governing party. Wouldn't the European Union say the same thing? So aren't we actually, as the European Union, blaming the other side for the things that we're doing ourselves? Isn't there this double standard that we are all, so used to hearing about?
Well, basically, it's still the right to do a summit there, and then if the government and the party is pro-European, then it is pro-European. It might be a PR event. Yes, that's true. But on the other hand, it lies in the hands of the people, the population, to vote for that party or to see it from a critical point of view. Of course, it's been Russia's strategy for a very long time, or especially also Putin's rhetoric, to always mirror the West and say, okay, the West has double standards and show the mirror towards the West. In certain degrees, that's true, and the Western world has made mistakes in that regard, and Russia is blaming that and using that for its own strategy. But in the long run, I would say anyway, we are in the middle of a geopolitical battle, and Armenia is in the middle of that front line of a geopolitical battle, the South Caucasus in general, and and it's a very, very severe issue. Iran now, and when you think of the transport routes, of course, the southern corridor from China towards the EU, the southern corridor is going through Iran, the northern corridor is going through Russia, and the middle corridor and all the oil gas transport routes that were established in the early 2000s due to negotiations in the 1990s, they're running through the Caucasus. So the Caucasus is, for a very long time, it's been a very remote and peripheral area, but now it's in the middle of that new geopolitical battle. And I would say Russia was very successful in getting Georgia closer to Russia again. Azerbaijan is a special case. Azerbaijan is always, they have a seesaw foreign policy because they are so independent and economically so strong due to their relevance in the international economy, because they're an oil producing and gas producing country, and they have a lot of money. So it's a special case. So in the end, it's about the question is about where will Armenia and Georgia belong to in the future, and as Georgia is now much closer towards Russia under the current Georgian Dream government and the influence of Bidzina Ivanishvili, who's the guy behind, who's directing the country in that regard. It's very much about Armenia, where this country will lead to in the future. In the past, we saw something different. Armenia was closer to Russia, and Georgia was close to Europe. And now, the two countries have changed their sides. On the other hand, Georgia would be much more important for the European Union, because the transport routes go already through Georgia, and Armenia is still a landlocked and also diplomatically, internationally blocked country. You must not forget, two of the two borders are still closed, namely to Turkey and to Azerbaijan. But still, it's the biggest chance the European Union has right now to gain stakes, to gain influence in the Southern Caucasus, and of course they are trying.
None of us are Armenian here, yeah? But I'm thinking, if I'm an Armenian government or an Armenian citizen, what kind of foreign policy would I like my country to have, given the fact that we are really, as a country, at this crossroads of geopolitical competition? What am I going to do? What would be the best strategy, Christoph? What would you say? Try to step in the shoes.
Well, I try to step now in the shoes of an Armenian Prime Minister. And first, what I would ask myself, and being Austrian maybe makes this a little bit more easy, having a country of roughly 3 million people, being landlocked, so, small country, landlocked, and what differs Armenia from Austria is, okay, you do not have like a unitary political bloc around you, but still it would be very important to have partners, reliable partners. And I think what Pashinyan shows, at least since 2021, since his re-election after the lost Second Karabakh War, that he's trying to have quite a multi-vectoral foreign policy, actually. So the EU path is one way of cultivating partners, and I think he's doing right that the EU is the prime partner to go to, because the EU as a bloc is the biggest trading partner for Armenia, and also is, I think, with or beyond, at least after Russia. I think Russia is still very important economic-wise. So, and that's the thing also with the EU. We cannot replace Russia's entanglement in Armenian economy for now, and also not in the near future. That's a very mid and long-term process and should be done very prudently, I think, because you see how Russia reacts to Armenia's West ambition, and that's always a very economical one. We saw the ban of Armenian mineral water to be sold in Russia in late April. It was after, I think, the Council of Europe also made a decision, and also the EP decision. And also after the EPC, there was another decision in Russia now to ban sell of Armenian products on two major online retailer websites. So you see Russia is using especially the economy card to pressure Armenia in staying close, and formally it remains an ally. The bilateral agreement from 1992 is still in place. Armenia has not left CSTO. Armenia has not left Eurasian Economic Union yet. So these are all steps Yerevan has to take before actually becoming a EU member and really embarking on this path, because that's the point of no return for Armenia then, to choose a new partner. So what Pashinyan now tries to do is to position himself very prudently as a politician who has a lot of options in different fields, and the EU is definitely the partner which has the biggest array of offers to Armenia, economically, politically, diplomatically, militarily to a certain degree. Here we are sometimes bound a little bit also by rules. But for example, military procurement, Armenia is looking towards India now. India has replaced Russia as the biggest weapons delivery country of origin. So I think he's doing very well with this multivectoral approach, until the point he has the ability to choose with the society the path where to go to, because leaving society aside, making it an elite project, might lead to a Georgia scenario in Armenia as well, where we have this pro-Western government being replaced by, on the first look, not so difficult partner who in the end then basically refers to authoritarian rule because of primarily political interest, and that suits Russia very well.
Yeah.
If I may add one point here from my own perception, when I was in Armenia last time, I had the chance to talk to people who are actually very close to Europe and represent European standards and European way in Armenia. But still, what they said, they wanted to stay out of this geopolitical battle, but rather what they have a very inside-worded perspective in that regard, because what they want is to change the situation in Armenia, to make it more democratic, but more democratic it also means get corrupt elites out of the process. It's been a captured state, and by elites, oligarchs, people misusing power for the private, very particularistic purposes, do business, being corrupt, getting rich. And that's what people are fed up with, what they really want to change. They want to see perspectives in Armenia, and they know democracy and Europe and stronger influence of Europe might be a good leverage or a necessary leverage in that regard. But overall, they have the second perspective is very business-oriented and economy-oriented. So what they want is economic prospects in the country, see more perspectives in business for them all, see a country that is flourishing economically. And in that regard, they do know they cannot take an either-or approach. They need Russia. I spoke to those people who said, okay, yes, of course, we would be very happy to be part of the European Union today and the European market, common market, but it's unrealistic. We are not ready. Our products, the standards of our products, we can sell those products to Russia, but we cannot sell them to Europe because the product standards do not meet European product standards, and we are not ready. Our economy is too weak. We are not ready for integration into the European common market. So economically, they need Russia, and they do know they need Russia. So that's also the reason for this multivectoral approach. So they want to find their position in the region, be more democratic, overcome state capture and corruption, but at the very same time see economic possibilities due to regional integration, and Russia is still part of that. So that's definitely one of the reasons why the country is still part of the Eurasian Economic Union, because we must not forget, from a security point of view, it's still part of the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and economically it's still part of the Eurasian Economic Union, dominated by Russia and by Kazakhstan. So in that regard, they're closer towards the Russian structures or structures dominated by Russia in the region than to the European Union today.
One thing maybe quickly to add, because you mentioned talking to the people, I recall a study from, I think it was Berlin-based Institute SOIS last year, where they had polls among the population in Armenia on EU perspectives. And for me, it was very striking that actually outside of Yerevan, in rural areas, the EU perspective has way more support than in Yerevan itself, which really also underlines, I think, this economic perspective, because looking at Armenian economy, it's very centered to the capital, and most of the money and the economic relations with Russia run through Yerevan in the end. But in the countryside, for the people there, I think also presence of the EU mission showed that EU has something to offer in support for developing rural areas, and we are doing a lot there, not just the EU, but also I think each EU member state with development projects and trying to build livelihoods for people also outside of the capital. So that's the other side of the coin, but it's really not contradicting what Hannah said on Armenia is bound to Russia.
Yeah. So basically the task for Armenia right now is to somehow reconcile this geopolitical competition of the European Union or the West in general and Russia, and not to, become, so to say, a victim of this competition. A very ambitious task and not an easy one. So good luck, Armenia. But you, Christoph, already mentioned the EU monitoring mission to Armenia, and I wanted to ask you more about it. So it was set up in 2023 and then prolonged already for a second time. So basically now it's there until 2027, February. And the mission basically has a very limited mandate, at least to my knowledge. It's just monitoring the border with Azerbaijan and only on the Armenian side of the border, right? We still know that the border is not entirely demarcated, so that part is monitored by the mission, which Azerbaijan doesn't find really good, so they aren't happy about it. But I'm wondering what else can this mission maybe contribute, or is there any sort of way how it can, enhance its mandate, or in any case, like maybe switch to some other areas where Armenia needs support? So basically, isn't there an entry point in form of this mission that can also maybe in some way provide those security guarantees for Armenia? I mean, given all the limitations of the EU's security or defense posture, yeah.
Well, there's one development right now which tells me that the EU might be actually also preparing to end the monitoring mission, if necessary, for a peace agreement with Azerbaijan, because, and that's not the bad thing, the EU is not leaving Armenia, don't worry. On April 21st, the European Council took the decision to establish a new CSDP mission, European Partnership Mission in Armenia. It's modeled like to the EU Partnership Mission in Moldova, to support the country's government in reforms, combating foreign interference and information meddling and cybersecurity and all that stuff. So I think technical capacity building is something the EU is now planning to establish. So the decision was taken. There is still no head and no information on how the partnership mission should look like, actually. But EU has now basically two missions in Armenia present. And I think that's also from European Council a wise decision based on the geopolitical environment, because what could the EU deliver with the monitoring mission in the end if Azerbaijan is against it, or would use this argument also to block signing of a peace agreement in the end. So I think that's very prudent to already now disentangle it, not then finding a solution of renaming the mission and leaving legal loopholes, but you can now pull out the EU MA and just leave EU partnership mission Armenia there without any legal tricks from other parties and blaming. So that was a wise approach, because in the end, I think the only security guarantee for Armenia, which would work against any future aggression from what state ever, would be joining European Union, having Article 42.7 then, and everything before that is very difficult to actually then implement, because EU, I'm quite sure, would not agree on sending a military mission there. The question would be, how big should this mission be? We don't have the forces. We need them also to deter Russia in Europe. So why sending military personnel to a landlocked country where you don't have any access? And in the worst case, they are really cut off and you cannot access them. Very difficult decision. And in the end, I think it also won't be won't be prohibiting any military aggression if most likely Azerbaijan wants it. So it's less of what the EU monitoring mission can be, but more of what the EU is now doing to relieve the pressure on EU how to deal with and how to support Armenia with a CSDP mission, while on the other hand having this criticism from the Azerbaijani side. And we are now in a good place that we can say, well, okay, the monitoring mission is no longer needed because a peace agreement is in place. And I think that was quite a wise decision by Brussels.
Yeah. Well, we're now in a good place for my next question, which is exactly about that. The accusations or criticism by Azerbaijan towards the European Union that Brussels supports Armenia much more than it should, or maybe that it than it's supposed to, if it wants to be a neutral party acting as, as a supporter of the peace process, right? So Azerbaijan won the war of 2020 until 2023, and since then there was this peace process, which we already, spoke about many times. And one of the things that Azerbaijan is really not happy about with the EU, and that's why it actually, rejected its mediation or facilitation offer, is that it's very much, like funding and supporting Armenia in all sorts of ways, and Azerbaijan is arguing that it doesn't receive similar support from the EU side. Do you find this accusation legitimate? First question, and second, what can the EU do about that? Yeah, because for the EU, it's also important to have good relationship with Azerbaijan for a number of reasons. You can probably name them, but how should it deal with that?
Well, I think the first point is if you look at that and those tensions, to take into account that Azerbaijan right now is in a very comfortable position. First of all, they've won the war. Secondly, they do not have any elections coming up. It's an authoritarian country, and actually President Ilham Aliyev and the government, they enjoy a lot of support, because in the eyes of a lot of the Azerbaijanis, they solved this conflict by reconquering Nagorno-Karabakh. And thirdly, and that's one more point, Europe needs Azerbaijan more than ever before in terms of energy security. Azerbaijan is one of the countries providing oil gas resources, able to supplement Russian exports to at least to a certain degree. From that point, Azerbaijan is in a strong position. What we also have to take into account is that EU-Azerbaijan relations, they have a very difficult past. Azerbaijan is an authoritarian country with a bad human rights record. That's what the EU is very much aware of, and we're very much criticizing. Secondly, Azerbaijan, EU, and Europe, there's been this caviar diplomacy, and this scandal that Azerbaijan has, for lobbying issues and reasons, has bribed European politicians to push forward its own interests. And for that reason, the EU was very cautious about Azerbaijan and refrained to a certain degree, even long before the war and the war in Ukraine. But now the European Union needs Azerbaijan. So, that's about this critical, the conflict in the past. At the very same time, the conflict between Armenia and the previous war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it has a very long conflict history. What we also forget is that Nagorno-Karabakh was a region with 1/3 of the population were Azerbaijanis, and they were expelled by Armenia in the early 1990s. Azerbaijan has been working on that, and also Armenia, but not found any agreement. And and when you look back, I mean, it's a very long conflict, a lot of accusations, a lot of emotions, and that regard, of course, it's difficult also for the European Union to stay objective and to stay out of that. What the European Union can do and is doing actually is to rely on legal duties, legal procedures, and be as objective as possible. But that's, of course, a very difficult task, given the difficult past, the long history of the conflict and the war, and also the geopolitical issues in the region, and the regime questions as well.
Christoph, do you agree?
I strongly agree with Hannes, and I think that the blame game Baku is playing is with regards to EU monitoring mission, for example, also very one-sided because, well, EU does not send emissions anywhere in the world because we want it, but you also need the invitation by the host country. So there must be a consent by the country you're going into, and a type of authority there we also acknowledge. So difficult question with failed state scenarios, but with Armenia it was quite clear. Armenia invited European Union after CSTO in 2022 actually turned also down Armenia's appeal for help. And also the new partnership mission is based on an Armenian appeal from December 2025, so before Christmas last year. That is the reason why EU is actually considering sending a mission there and supporting the country. And Azerbaijan has not stated its will to invite European Union. I think when the mission planning for EUMM was going on, EU would have been very happy to implement monitoring on both sides of the border. But what I see from observing this, there was no will in Baku to have EU monitors on Azerbaijani territory. So I think that the blame here is not very well funded. Of course, you can argue that EU is now having more interest in Armenia politically, but it's due to Azerbaijan's choice to have a very independent foreign policy, and its strong position allows Baku to play this game like that. But we should not take every blame from Baku as the European Union. I think what we are doing is based on what is the claimed needs from the current Armenian government and what we could offer. So if Azerbaijan wants more, they also can always state it. And I think we are taking, for example, also the question of increasing support for demining more seriously now, as Kaja Kallas stated a few weeks ago. So we are looking in ways to cooperate. And the other thing with EU and blame is also who is the blame directed at, because of course with EU it's always difficult. We are talking about European Union here. Well, the latest blames were directed toward European Parliament, not the Commission. Commission is very much aware of the pragmatic approach because of economic relations, and Parliament is sometimes more vocal when it comes to human rights, democracy, and of course here it's very difficult for Azerbaijan to just also neglect it and let it be, because that would mean that the regime itself is also depicting itself a little bit weak if you do not react to such claims.
You know, but that's also, it's always been an argument by Baku that the EU, or the international community is not unbiased in this context. Azerbaijan has always said internationally, according to international law, Nagorno-Karabakh is integral part of Azerbaijan. Secondly, we've been working in international formats since the ceasefire in 1994, but internationally nothing was reached. And thirdly, and that's what I also know from Azerbaijan in my time when I spent there. There are victims in Azerbaijan, people that were expelled in the 1990s and that were not integrated into the Azerbaijani society until recently. They still lived in camps. And this feeling of, Azerbaijanis are also victims of that conflict, or were the major victims in the 1990s. That's very much part of the identity and the knowledge of the population and the government. And what I believe is that people in Azerbaijan, and probably also the government, had always the feeling that's something that's neglected. Nobody knows how much Azerbaijan suffered in the 1990s, but took side of Armenia. And in that regard, I would say it's in that regard, in regards to a real peace-bringing actor, the European Union has to be be very careful and needs a very careful approach.
I think here, however, the time for EU to shine will be after peace agreement is signed, because then it's very much also about reconciliation of societies, and here EU could do way more, because, and I think that's the tricky thing with Azerbaijan-EU relations, and also the latest blame. It was not about Nagorno-Karabakh as a territory, and that EU is like supporting the reconstruction of Nagorno-Karabakh as an entity, and that they should become Armenian. It was about the right to return, right of property, so basic civil human rights. And I think you see the difficulty of authoritarian rule and the very human rights-centered approach to certain things. And also for Baku, now it's not a time. Maybe with a peace agreement also for Baku, there would be a lot of room where EU could step in and support this process, and also part of process for change without like talking about democratization of Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Because it's about are the people allowed to go back to the country and to the regions they have left? That's the big question. And in Armenia, when I spoke to people, they do not trust the situation because there's no rule of law. They're not sure if Azerbaijan can provide this security. On the other hand, Azerbaijan says, we do provide that. We give the best future to the region. We will invest a lot into infrastructure, and they do have the money. So at least in that regard, it's very much about, on the one hand, rule of law, or guaranteeing stability and a secure environment for the people that are going back. That does not necessarily need the rule of law. Actually, a lot of post-Soviet states, they provide security and a stable public order without the rule of law. But on the other hand, of course, the others, the Armenian refugees, they do not trust in that. Say, okay, it might not work in the end. There might be a single case, and without the rule of law, we do not trust the system. So that's a trap. That's a very difficult situation. And here, the EU might play a bigger role and in this negotiation process. But it's very, very difficult because the EU has to be objective and try to integrate both sides. But then, apart from that, we have this bigger dimension I've outlined: the geopolitical battle, the battle, corruption allegations, the caviar diplomacy, the EU refraining from Azerbaijan, all those tensions, the EU that needs Azerbaijan for oil and gas imports. And that's another dimension.
That's a topic for another podcast episode, I think, because until then we're watching the elections in Armenia, and then we'll see what happens, because even during this discussion we only touched upon Azerbaijan, Russia, and the EU, right? But there is also a multitude of other actors. We didn't speak about Turkey, we didn't speak about China, we didn't speak about the United States, who are now very actively, also present in Armenia. But indeed, let's leave it for the next time. And thank you for your insights, and let's see what happens in Armenia on the 7th of June.
Thank you for inviting me, Marila.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
This was episode 42 of Peace Matters. If you enjoyed this discussion, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.